Banishment into the deadly winter of 1347 was meant to be a frozen death sentence for Maeve, after Alpha Elijah brutally severed their mate bond. Instead of succumbing to the ice as he intended, however, she stumbled upon the cursed Abernathy barn, coming face to face with the terrifying monster lurking within its shadows. The winter of 1347 would be recorded in the surviving parish registries as the Great Mortality of the Frost. In the secluded valley of Oakhaven, hidden deep within the treacherous alpine borders between French and Germanic territories, the cold did not just bite, it slaughtered. It froze the rivers solid, snapped ancient pine trees in half with the sheer weight of the ice, and starved the wild game into extinction. But for the Oakhaven pack, the true brutality did not come from the plunging temperatures. It came from their leader. Maeve stood in the great hall of the fortress, her breath pluming in the drafty, cavernous room. The scent of roasted venison, spilled ale, and damp wool hung heavy in the air. But beneath it all was the suffocating pheromone of an alpha's absolute dominance. Alpha Elijah sat upon the high seat, his heavy fur cloak draped over his broad shoulders. He was a man carved from granite and ambition. He had seized the pack leadership 3 years prior during a bloody coup, and since then, Oakhaven had become a place of ruthless martial law. Tonight was the feast of the winter solstice, the sacred night when the moon goddess revealed the fated mates of the pack. Maeve, the 20-year-old daughter of the pack's disgraced former historian, Arthur, kept her eyes glued to the stone floor. She was considered weak, a runt whose wolf was too small, too quiet, and too submissive for the militaristic society Elijah was building. Her father had been executed for treason when he dared question Elijah's right to rule, leaving Maeve an orphan and an outcast, permitted to live only out of a twisted sense of public mercy. Suddenly, a blinding, searing heat struck Maeve's chest. It was as if a hot iron had been pressed directly against her heart. She gasped, stumbling forward, her hands flying to her sternum. A golden, ethereal thread of light, visible only to the wolves, pulsed in the dim hall, connecting her heart directly to the high seat. She looked up. Elijah's amber eyes were locked onto hers. The hall fell deadly silent. The musicians stopped playing. The drunken laughter died in the throats of the warriors. The goddess had spoken. The orphaned runt of a traitor was fated to the ruthless Alpha of Oakhaven. For a fraction of a second, Maeve felt a surge of foolish, desperate hope. The mate bond was sacred. It was the one law of their kind that superseded all mortal decrees. The crushing loneliness that had defined her entire existence was supposed to end tonight. She took a tentative step toward the dais, her inner wolf whining softly in submission and longing. Elijah stood. The sheer size of him cast a long, terrifying shadow over the hearth fire. But there was no warmth in his gaze, only a cold, calculating disgust. He looked from Maeve to Lady Catherine, the imposing, wealthy daughter of the neighboring Riverpack Alpha, who had been sitting at Elijah's right hand, practically promised to him by political treaty. "A mistake," Elijah's voice boomed, echoing off the vaulted stone ceiling. "The goddess tests me with a parasite." Maeve froze. "Elijah," she whispered, the name slipping out before she could stop it. The mate bond hummed, practically screaming at her to bridge the distance, to touch him, to complete the union. "You are the blood of a traitor," Elijah spat, stepping down from the dais. He didn't walk like a lover. He stalked like an executioner. "You are frail. Your wolf is a pathetic, cowering thing. You bring no land, no warriors, no strength to Oakhaven. You bring only shame." "The bond," Maeve choked out, tears of humiliation and physical pain welling in her eyes. To be denied by a fated mate felt like poison in the veins. "I reject the bond," Elijah roared, his alpha aura exploding outward, forcing half the room to their knees. Maeve collapsed, clutching her chest as a sickening tearing sensation ripped through her soul. "I, Alpha Elijah of Oakhaven, formally and absolutely reject Maeve, daughter of Arthur, as my mate, my Luna, and my equal." Maeve screamed. It wasn't a sound of sorrow. It was a sound of pure, biological agony. The golden thread connecting them snapped violently, recoiling into her chest and leaving a hollow, bleeding void where her soul had been. She curled into a ball on the cold stone, gagging as her body went into shock. Elijah didn't flinch. He stood over her writhing form. "By the laws of our ancestors, a rejected wolf without family has no place in the pack. You are a liability. Throw her out." Murmurs erupted, but no one dared defy him, not when he nodded to his beta, a cruel man named Tahamas. Thomas grabbed Maeve by her hair, hauling her up. "It's a blizzard out there, Alpha." An older woman, Beatrice, the pack healer, dared to speak up. "To exile her tonight is a death sentence. The wind chill will freeze her blood before she clears the valley." "Then let the snow take her," Elijah replied coldly, turning his back and offering his hand to Lady Catherine. "Oakhaven has no room for the weak." Thomas dragged Maeve, still reeling and half-conscious from the severed bond, through the hall. The heavy oak doors were unbarred and shoved open. The sheer violence of the storm instantly invaded the room, a howling wall of white, blinding ice and roaring wind. Without a second thought, Thomas hurled Maeve out into the darkness and slammed the doors shut. The heavy thud of the iron deadbolt locking into place was the loudest sound she had ever heard. She was alone, exiled, rejected, and the deadliest blizzard of the century was just beginning to rage. The cold was an entity. It had teeth, claws, and a merciless intent. Within minutes, Maeve's thin woolen dress was soaked through and frozen stiff, acting like a cage of ice against her skin. She forced a shift, hoping the fur of her wolf would save her. But the violent severing of the mate bond had left her spirit shattered. Her wolf emerged, small, weak, and limping, its russet fur offering little protection against the gale-force winds. She stumbled blindly through the snowdrifts, which were already piling as high as a man's chest. The wind screamed through the ancient pines, a deafening roar that drowned out her own pathetic whimpers. She had no destination. To the north lay the impassable, jagged peaks. To the south, the freezing river. Her paws went numb. Then, her legs. The terrifying, sleepy warmth of hypothermia began to sing, a seductive lullaby in the back of her mind. "Just lie down," it whispered. "Just close your eyes. It won't hurt anymore." As she crested a treacherous ridge, tumbling down the other side in a chaotic avalanche of loose snow, she hit something solid. Wood. Maeve forced her heavy eyelids open. Looming out of the blinding whiteout was a massive, dilapidated structure. She recognized the silhouette from the ghost stories the pack elders whispered around the hearth. The old Abernathy estate. 50 years ago, during a brutal purge by paranoid human lords in the Inquisition, the Abernathy pack had been completely slaughtered here. The humans had burned the manor to the ground, but strangely, the massive timber barn had survived. Pack law forbade anyone from stepping foot on the cursed grounds, claiming the soil was poisoned with the blood of the massacred and haunted by vengeful spirits. Elijah strictly enforced the ban, executing anyone who trespassed. But Maeve was already dead. The rules of the living no longer applied to her. She forced herself back into her human form, too exhausted to maintain the shift. Naked, shivering violently, her skin a mottled blue and white, she dragged herself toward the massive barn doors. The wind fought her, pushing her back, but she threw her entire meager weight against the rusted iron latch. With a groan of ancient hinges, the door cracked open just enough for her to slip inside. She collapsed onto the floor, pulling the door shut behind her. The immediate absence of the howling wind was a shock to her senses. It was dark, pitch black. But as she lay there waiting for her heart to stop, she noticed something impossible. It was warm, not just slightly warmer than the storm outside, but genuinely, radiantly warm. The scent of dry hay, ancient oak, and something else, something wild, deeply masculine, and laced with the metallic tang of dried blood, filled her nose. Maeve dragged herself forward, her hands brushing against a thick pile of straw. She found an old, heavy horse blanket and wrapped it around her shaking, naked body. As her eyes adjusted to the gloom, a soft, flickering orange light flared to life at the far end of the barn. A hearth. Someone had built a crude stone hearth into the back wall, and embers were glowing within it. "I told you." A voice rumbled from the shadows, a sound so deep it vibrated in the floorboards beneath her. "If you send more hunters, I will send back their heads. Though Elijah must be getting desperate if he sends a starving girl to do his killing." Maeve froze. The sheer terror of the voice overrode the numbness in her limbs. She scrambled backward, clutching the blanket to her chest. From the shadows beyond the firelight stepped a nightmare. He was a man, but only just. He stood easily over 6.5 feet tall, his chest bare and covered in a network of jagged, silver scars that spoke of dozens of lethal battles. Thick, dark hair fell past his shoulders, and his eyes, the most terrifying part of him, were a piercing, unnatural silver. They were the eyes of an alpha, but wilder, unrestrained, and utterly feral. He moved with a predatory grace, stepping fully into the light. That was when Maeve saw the heavy iron cuff around his left wrist, attached to a thick chain bolted directly into the massive central support beam of the barn. He was a prisoner. Or a monster, chained away for the safety of the world. I am no hunter." Maeve forced the words through her chattering teeth, her voice cracking. I was exiled." The massive man stopped, his nostrils flared, taking in her scent. A look of deep confusion, followed by a sudden, intense sharpness, crossed his rugged features. He tilted his head, his silver eyes locking onto her chest, right where the phantom ache of the broken mate bond throbbed violently. "You smell of Elijah," he growled, the name dripping with absolute venom. "But underneath, you smell of severed ties, broken magic. He rejected you." Maeve nodded weakly, the shame of it causing a fresh wave of tears to spill down her freezing cheeks. "Yes, tonight. He threw me out to die." The man stared at her for a long, suffocating moment. The tension in the air was so thick, Maeve could barely breathe. Then, the feral hostility in his posture broke. He sighed, running a massive, scarred hand through his hair. "You're freezing to death," he stated, his tone shifting from murderous to gruffly observant. "Come to the fire. Unless you prefer the ghost stories outside." Maeve hesitated. Going near this chained giant felt like walking willingly into a bear trap. But the warmth of the fire was an absolute necessity. Shivering, clutching the coarse blanket, she crawled toward the hearth. He stepped back, giving her space, though his silver eyes never left her. As she curled up near the flames, the agonizing process of her nerves thawing began. She winced, stifling a cry of pain as blood rushed back to her extremities. "Drink," a deep voice said. She opened her eyes to see a dented iron cup placed on the floor near her hand. Steam rose from it. The man was sitting cross-legged a few feet away, right at the limit of his heavy iron chain. "What is it?" she whispered. "Pine needle tea and dried deer blood," he replied flatly. "It will shock your system back to life and give your wolf the iron it needs to heal your frostbite." She took the cup with trembling hands and drank. It tasted earthy and metallic, but it hit her stomach like a furnace, radiating life-saving heat outward. "Who are you?" Maeve asked, her voice stronger now. "Why are you chained in the cursed barn?" The man looked into the flames, the flickering light casting demonic shadows across his scarred face. "My name is Ronan," he said quietly, "and I am not cursed. I am the rightful alpha of this entire territory, and the man who rejected you is the bastard who stole it from me." The revelation hung in the stifling, warm air of the barn. Maeve stared at the chained giant, her mind racing. Ronan? The name was a ghost, a whisper she had only heard from her late father's hidden archives. Ronan of the Silvermont bloodline, the original ruling family of the valley, long thought to have been entirely wiped out during the human massacres 50 years ago. You're a Silvermont, Maeve breathed, her eyes widening. But the histories say your line ended. Ronan let out a harsh, barking laugh that held no humor. History is written by the scavengers who steal the throne. Little wolf, my family survived the fires of 39. We rebuilt in secret. But 3 years ago, Elijah, my own beta, poisoned my father, slaughtered my siblings in their sleep, and took the pack by force. He tugged at the massive chain on his wrist, the heavy iron clanking loudly in the quiet barn. He couldn't kill me. The valley's magic is tied to my bloodline. If I die without an heir, the land dies. The prey disappears. The winters become lethal. So, he dragged me here, to the one place he knew the pack would never go, and chained me like a dog to keep the land's magic flowing while he reaps the benefits. Maeve's heart pounded. It made sense. The brutal winters of the last 3 years, the barren hunting grounds, it wasn't a curse from the moon goddess. It was the land reacting to the imprisonment of its true alpha. My father, Maeve said softly, the memory of her father's execution flashing in her mind. Arthur. He was the pack historian. He tried to tell the council that Elijah's claim was illegitimate. He said there were hidden deeds, blood pacts, signed in the old ways that proved Elijah was a usurper. Elijah beheaded him for it. Ronan's silver eyes snapped to hers, a profound intensity igniting within them. Arthur was your father? He was a good man, a brave man. He smuggled me food during my first year in this hellhole before Elijah caught him. A strange, complex emotion twisted in Maeve's chest. Her father had known. He had died trying to protect the truth, trying to protect Ronan. Outside, the blizzard roared with apocalyptic fury, slamming against the thick timber walls of the barn. But inside, a strange intimacy had formed. They were two broken outcasts, bound together by the man who had destroyed both their lives. As the hours passed, the shock of the cold faded, replaced by an exhaustion so deep Maeve felt her bones might crumble. She drifted in and out of sleep near the fire. Every time she woke, Ronan was awake, watching the door, a silent guardian in the dark. Sometime deep in the night, Maeve awoke with a violent gasp. The phantom pain in her chest, the wound left by Elijah's rejection, flared with a white-hot agony. She doubled over, clutching the coarse blanket, struggling to breathe as a cold sweat broke out across her forehead. It was the rejection sickness. When a wolf is rejected by their fated mate, the soul literally begins to wither. Without a pack, without a mate, the body simply shuts down. Breathe. Ronan's voice was suddenly right beside her. He had moved to the very edge of his chain's reach, his massive frame hovering over her. The severed bond. It's pulling you into the dark. You have to fight it. I can't, Maeve sobbed, her entire body seizing with pain. It hurts. It's empty. Ronan hesitated. In the dim firelight, she saw a flicker of profound vulnerability in his terrifying eyes. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out his large, scarred hand and placed it gently over her chest, right where the pain was worst. The moment his skin touched hers, the universe tilted. A shockwave of pure, blinding heat erupted from the point of contact. It wasn't the agonizing, burning sensation she had felt with Elijah. This was a rich, deep, golden warmth that flooded her veins like liquid sunlight. The hollow, bleeding void in her soul was instantly filled with a roaring, ancient power. Maeve gasped, her eyes flying open. She stared at Ronan. He looked equally stunned, his chest heaving, his silver eyes wide with shock. The air between them crackled with an undeniable, intoxicating electricity. The scent of him, wild pine, musk, and winter rain, suddenly became the most beautiful, vital thing she had ever inhaled. Her inner wolf, which had been whimpering and dying only moments ago, suddenly threw its head back and howled in pure, triumphant ecstasy. "Impossible," Ronan whispered, pulling his hand back as if he had been burned, though he couldn't tear his eyes away from hers. "What What was that? Maeve breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs, the pain completely gone, replaced by a desperate, pulling need to touch him again. The goddess, Ronan murmured, his voice thick with awe. She doesn't make mistakes. Elijah wasn't your fated mate, Maeve. He forced the bond through dark magic to solidify his claim, hoping the moon would bless it. When he rejected you, he broke his own spell. Ronan swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to her lips before meeting her eyes again. The goddess didn't abandon you to the storm. She sent you to me. You are my mate. Before Maeve could process the magnitude of his words, before she could lean into the undeniable gravity pulling her toward the scarred, chained alpha, a sound shattered the sacred quiet of the barn. Crack. It was the unmistakable sound of a heavy timber beam snapping under the weight of something massive outside. But it wasn't the storm. Ronan's head snapped toward the massive barn doors, his silver eyes flashing with sudden, violent murder. His jaw clenched, and a low, terrifying growl began to rumble in his chest. "We are not alone," Ronan hissed, stepping between Maeve and the door, the iron chain pulling taut. Outside, a voice called out, barely audible over the screaming wind. "Spread out! Find the entrance!" The Alpha said the scent led this way. It was Thomas, Elijah's beta. Beta. Elijah hadn't just thrown her out. He had realized that as the daughter of the pack historian, Maeve might know where the ancient deeds were hidden. He had sent his hunters into the blizzard not to ensure she died, but to interrogate her first. And now they had found the one place they were never supposed to look. The heavy iron latch of the barn door began to rattle violently. The heavy oak doors of the Abernathy barn groaned in agony. Outside, the howling blizzard seemed to perfectly mask the rhythmic, brutal thudding of a battering ram. The rusted iron deadbolt, forged a half-century ago, began to bend inward with a sickening screech. Maeve's breath hitched in her throat, her heart, just moments ago, overflowing with the golden warmth of the true mate bond, now hammered with ice-cold terror. She scrambled backward, clutching the coarse horse blanket to her chest. "Stay behind me," Ronan commanded. His voice was no longer a rough whisper. It was the earth-shaking, resonant boom of a territorial alpha. He stepped firmly between Maeve and the trembling doors, his massive, scarred back shielding her. He rolled his broad shoulders, his muscles bunching and coiling with lethal intent. The thick chain binding his left wrist pulled taut against the central support beam, groaning under his immense strength. With a final deafening crack, the iron deadbolt shattered. The massive doors flew inward, carried by the concussive force of the gale. A swirling vortex of white snow and freezing wind exploded into the barn, instantly biting into Maeve's bare skin. Through the blinding curtain of ice, 3 figures stepped over the threshold. They were clad in the heavy black-furred cloaks of Elijah's elite hunters. At the center stood Thomas, his cruel face pulled into a sneer of triumph. In his hands, he gripped a heavy, silver-tipped hunting spear, a weapon explicitly designed to tear through Lycan flesh and poison the bloodstream. Flanking him were Garrett and Finn, 2 of the pack's most ruthless enforcers, holding loaded crossbows with silver bolts. "Well, well," Thomas drawled, his voice carrying over the roar of the wind as he kicked the splintered remains of the door out of his way. "I must admit, Runt, I didn't think you had the spine to make it this far. The Alpha thought you'd freeze before you hit the tree line." Maeve pressed herself against the cold stone of the hearth, her knuckles turning white as she gripped her blanket. "Why are you here, Thomas? He exiled me. I am no longer of Oakhaven." Thomas chuckled, a dark, grating sound. He hadn't yet seen Ronan, who was standing perfectly still in the deep shadows, just beyond the reach of the swirling snow. "You aren't," Thomas agreed, taking a slow step forward. "But your treacherous father hid something before he lost his head. The old parish records, the land deeds of the valley. Elijah wants them, Maeve, and he knows Arthur would have told his only daughter where they were buried. You're coming back with us. We have a nice, warm fire waiting in the dungeons to help you remember." "She isn't going anywhere with you," The voice rolled out of the darkness like a physical shockwave. It was so thick with alpha command that Garrett and Finn physically flinched, their crossbows wavering. Thomas stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes darted toward the shadows, squinting against the dim light of the dying hearth. "Who goes there? Show yourself. This territory belongs to Alpha Elijah. This territory belongs to the blood of the earth," Ronan snarled, stepping fully into the meager light. "And your false king's blood is about to water it." The breath left Thomas in a visible, panicked rush. He stared at the towering giant, his eyes widening in absolute paralyzing horror as he took in the silver eyes, the network of battle scars, and the regal, feral posture. "By the goddess!" Finn whispered, taking a step back toward the raging storm outside. "It's a ghost. It's the Silvermont." "He's not a ghost," Thomas snapped, though his voice trembled violently. He recovered his composure, his grip tightening on his silver-tipped spear as his eyes landed on the thick iron cuff bolted to Ronan's wrist. A cruel, opportunistic smile slowly spread across his face. "Look at him. He's a chained dog. Elijah didn't kill him because he was afraid of the land's magic. But if we bring the usurper's head back to the fortress, we'll be made lords of the inner circle." "You can try, Thomas," Ronan said softly, his silver eyes flashing with a predatory gleam. "But you will die in the dark." "Shoot him!" Thomas roared. Garrett and Finn raised their crossbows. Thwack! Thwack! 2 silver bolts tore through the air. Ronan moved with a speed that defied his massive size. He didn't just dodge, he lunged. He caught the thick iron chain binding him and violently whipped it forward. The heavy metal links intercepted one bolt, shattering it in midair. The second bolt grazed his shoulder, tearing a shallow gash, but Ronan didn't even flinch. Before Finn could reload, Ronan reached the absolute limit of his chain. He planted his bare feet into the dirt floor and yanked the chain with a terrifying, primal roar. The central support beam of the barn groaned, raining ancient dust and splinters down upon them, but the iron held fast. Using the tension of the chain, Ronan pivoted, using his momentum to hurl a heavy wooden feeding trough straight at Finn. It struck the hunter in the chest with the force of a battering ram, launching him backward out the open doors and into the deadly blizzard. He didn't get back up. "Spread out! Keep out of his reach!" Thomas yelled, stabbing his silver spear forward to keep Ronan at bay. Garrett drew a long, curved hunting knife, circling wide to the right, aiming to slip past Ronan and get to Maeve. "Maeve, run!" Ronan shouted, blocking Thomas's spear thrust with his bare, scarred forearm, ignoring the hiss of burning flesh as the silver seared him. But Maeve didn't run. As she watched Ronan bleed to protect her, the overwhelming, paralyzing fear that had ruled her entire life suddenly evaporated. The golden warmth of the mate bond flared in her chest, not just as a source of comfort, but as a wellspring of ancient, untapped power. She wasn't the weak, pathetic runt Elijah had claimed she was. She was the fated Luna of the true Alpha of Oakhaven. Her eyes darted to the thick iron cuff on Ronan's wrist. As Thomas pushed Ronan back, forcing him closer to the fire, the flickering orange light illuminated the dark metal. Maeve gasped. Deeply etched into the iron were ancient, jagged runes, her father's secret archives. The nights Arthur had spent poring over forbidden texts by candlelight, whispering to himself. "The chains of the usurper are forged in deceit," her father's voice echoed vividly in her memory. "Bound by the blood of a traitor, they can only be shattered by the blood of the fated. The true Luna holds the key to the king's iron." Elijah hadn't just chained Ronan with metal. He had sealed him with dark blood magic. That was why Ronan's immense strength couldn't break the central beam, or the cuff. The magic was holding him, feeding on his isolation. Garrett lunged at Maeve, his knife raised. "Come here, you little bitch." Maeve didn't cower. She grabbed the dented iron cup Ronan had given her earlier and hurled it directly into Garrett's face. As the hunter stumbled back with a curse, dropping his knife, Maeve dove to the dirt floor, snatching the blade. "Ronan, the chain!" Maeve screamed over the din of the battle. Ronan glanced back, catching a vicious slash from Thomas's spear across his ribs in the process. He roared in pain, but he held his ground, keeping himself between Thomas and Maeve. Maeve scrambled forward on her hands and knees. She didn't hesitate. She pressed the sharp edge of Garrett's hunting knife deep into the palm of her own left hand. She gritted her teeth as the blade sliced through her flesh, a line of bright, crimson blood welling to the surface. "What are you doing?" Thomas yelled, noticing her movements. He shoved Ronan back with the shaft of his spear and lunged toward Maeve. "Mine!" Ronan thundered. His eyes bled from silver into a glowing, luminescent gold, the absolute mark of an alpha protecting his fated mate. He threw his massive body into Thomas, tackling the beta to the ground in a tangle of limbs and teeth. Maeve reached the thick iron chain. She wrapped her bleeding, left hand directly around the cold metal cuff clamped to Ronan's struggling wrist. The moment her blood seeped into the ancient jagged runes, the barn erupted in a blinding flash of silver light. The reaction was instantaneous and violently explosive. The dark magic binding the iron didn't just break, it shattered. The heavy iron cuff exploded into a dozen pieces, sending shards of shrapnel burying into the wooden walls. The shockwave of the breaking curse blasted outward, knocking Maeve onto her back and sending Thomas rolling across the dirt floor. A profound, suffocating silence fell over the barn for exactly 1 second. Then, the true Alpha of Oakhaven rose. Freed from 3 years of magical suppression and physical chains, Ronan's presence expanded until it felt like it was crushing the very air out of the room. He didn't shift into a wolf. He didn't need to. His human form radiated such concentrated, lethal power that the wooden floorboards beneath his feet actually began to frost over, the elemental magic of the land bowing to his sudden, unrestrained will. Garrett, who had just recovered from the iron cup to the face, took one look at the towering, unchained Silvermont Alpha and dropped his knife. He turned to flee into the blizzard. Ronan simply flicked his wrist. A jagged spike of solid ice erupted from the frozen dirt floor, catching Garrett through the calf and pinning him to the ground. The hunter screamed in agony. Thomas scrambled backward, his spear lost in the struggle, his back hitting the stone of the hearth. His face was devoid of color, his eyes wide with the realization of his own impending death. Wait. Silvermont, have mercy." Ronan walked slowly toward him. Every step he took resonated with the heavy, ancient magic of the valley. "Mercy?" Ronan's voice was a dark, rumbling thunder. "You slaughtered my family in their beds, Thomas. You chained me in the dark. And tonight, you tried to murder my mate." He reached down, grabbing Thomas by the thick fur collar of his cloak, and lifted the man off the ground with one hand as effortlessly as lifting a rag doll. "Please," Thomas choked out, his legs kicking uselessly in the air. Elijah made me do it. He has the army. He has the fortress. You can't defeat him." "I don't need an army to kill a thief," Ronan growled, his golden eyes burning into Thomas's soul. "I am going to let you live, Thomas. Not out of mercy, but because I need a messenger." Ronan leaned in close, his breath pluming in the freezing air. "Run back to the fortress. Tell Elijah that the chains are broken. Tell him the Silvermont bloodline has found its Luna. And tell him that before the sun sets tomorrow, I am coming to tear his throat out and mount his head on the gates of Oakhaven." With a brutal shove, Ronan hurled Thomas through the broken doors and out into the screaming blizzard. Thomas didn't look back. He scrambled to his feet and disappeared into the blinding whiteout, running for his life. Ronan stood at the threshold of the open doors for a long moment, his broad chest heaving as the adrenaline and centuries-old magic settled beneath his skin. He looked out at the raging storm. Slowly, he closed his eyes and let out a long, resonant, echoing howl that carried over the wind. It was a howl of claiming, a howl of return, almost immediately, as if the sky itself had been holding its breath, waiting for that very sound. The blizzard began to break. The deafening roar of the wind softened into a mournful sigh. The blinding sheets of ice slowed to a gentle, drifting snowfall. The deadly freeze that had choked the valley for 3 long years finally snapped. Ronan turned back into the barn. The terrifying, feral aura surrounding him melted away the second his eyes found Maeve. She was sitting on the floor, cradling her bleeding hand, staring at him in absolute awe. He was no longer the chained monster in the dark. He was a king. Ronan crossed the room, dropping to his knees before her. The sheer size of him was still intimidating, but his movements were impossibly gentle. He reached out, his large, calloused hands carefully taking her injured one. "You broke the binding," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion that sounded dangerously close to tears. 3 years of darkness, and you shattered it in a second. "My father knew," Maeve replied softly, wincing slightly as Ronan brought her bleeding palm to his lips. He ran his tongue over the shallow cut, his healing saliva sealing the wound almost instantly, leaving only a faint, silver scar. He knew the true Luna's blood would free you. Ronan looked up into her eyes. The golden thread of the mate bond, the same magic that Elijah had violently ripped away from her, now pulsed brilliantly between them. It wrapped around their hearts, tying their souls together with an unbreakable, undeniable force. "Elijah told me I was a parasite," Maeve whispered, a single tear escaping her eye, not of sadness, but of overwhelming relief. "He said I was weak, that I brought nothing." "Elijah is a fool who couldn't recognize a goddess if she stood before him," Ronan said fiercely, reaching up to cup her face, his thumb gently wiping away the tear. "You are Maeve, of the Oakhaven pack. You are the daughter of Arthur, the bravest man I ever knew, and you are my mate, my equal, my Luna. Your strength just saved my life, and together, we are going to save our people." Maeve leaned into his touch, the warmth of his skin sinking deep into her bones, chasing away the last remnants of the deadly frost. For the first time in her entire life, she felt entirely, perfectly safe. She felt like she belonged. "We take back the valley?" Maeve asked, a new, fiery determination igniting in her chest. "We take back our home," Ronan corrected, a fierce, beautiful smile touching his lips. He stood up, pulling Maeve effortlessly to her feet and wrapping her tightly in his heavy fur cloak, shielding her from the lingering chill. He wrapped one massive arm securely around her waist, anchoring her to his side. Together, they walked out of the forbidden barn and into the breaking dawn. The storm had passed. The heavy, dark clouds were parting, allowing the first brilliant rays of morning sunlight to strike the snow-covered peaks of the valley. The world was quiet, pristine, and waiting. In the distance, the stone spires of the Oakhaven fortress loomed against the horizon. Elijah was waiting behind those walls, surrounded by his stolen army and his false reign. But as Maeve looked up at Ronan, feeling the unstoppable ancient magic thrumming through his veins and matching the powerful rhythm of her own heart, she felt no fear. Elijah had thrown her out into the cold to die. He had no idea that she was coming back with the storm itself. From a rejected runt left to freeze, to the true Luna standing beside the rightful Alpha, Maeve's journey proves that the darkest storms can lead us to our greatest destiny. Will Ronan and Maeve successfully tear down Elijah's false reign and reclaim Oakhaven? If you loved this epic tale of betrayal, magic, and fated mates, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling werewolf romance stories.